Hello everyone, I'm Molly O'Brien. Welcome to GoLocal Live in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. It is January, Friday the 19th, and thank you so much for joining us. Today we're talking about several community issues, so we're glad that you can join us. I'd like to say hello and welcome to Michelle Wilcox. She is COO of Crossroads Rhode Island. Michelle, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
We're excited to have this conversation today. So Crossroads, as many of you know, is the largest homeless services organization in Rhode Island, so we're happy to have you in studio. So we're going to talk about a couple things here today. The weather in Rhode Island, and really the whole country, has been very turbulent over the past couple of weeks. We had that really tough stretch at the end of December and January, so we're going to talk about Crossroads' response over the course of the rough weather that we had. And then we're going to talk about some solutions to homelessness, because Crossroads doesn't just provide immediate relief, but you have also worked through and have helped many families and individuals come out on top. So we're going to talk about that. But I'd first like to talk to you a little bit about and get your thoughts on the Providence City Council last night passed a resolution. They're creating a special committee to go over and look at and recommend some solutions to homelessness. And they just passed this resolution last night. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. I had not heard about the Providence City Council resolution until I got here today with you, and so took a quick look at it, and certainly it's not something that we knew about, but in reading it, it seems to me that it's on the right track, and certainly as it's written, the City Council is resolved to create a commission to study and come up with plans to help the people in Providence who experience homelessness and reduce the number of people experiencing homelessness, and so that's certainly a very positive thing, and I think if we can be a help to that, we would be.
Do you think that the city, in this case, they're creating a special subcommittee to look into this, to do the research? Do you think, or do you hope to see them reach out to services organizations like yourself for input and certain messaging and continued research?
Yes, I mean, and again, in reading the way the resolution was written, they were quoting extensively from data and statistics that are provided by the Coalition for the Homeless, which the data comes from the providers like Crossroads. So it seems like, again, without knowing a lot about it, it seems like it's a positive thing, and I certainly look forward to hearing more about it.
Great. So we are on the right track, hopefully. Again, that just happened last night at the Providence City Council meeting. So any progress that we can see moving forward on this issue and helping those that are in homelessness, and it's a positive message then.
Absolutely, yes.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about what Crossroads Rhode Island does. The organization has been well-founded within this community for a long time. We've had you here on the program, not you specifically, but we've had Crossroads Rhode Island on the program. Talk to us a little bit about what this past year has been like for your organization. We just popped out of 2017 and we're into 2018, but talk to us just a little bit about what 2017 saw overall.
Sure. So, 2017 was another, booming year for Crossroads. Unfortunately, homelessness is a booming business, and we're experiencing with the coming out of the recession, the Great Recession. We saw numbers really reach all-time high during that period, and they've leveled out a little bit. But the fact is, we still have way too many people in the state, individuals and families, adults and children who find themselves experiencing homelessness. Last year we served over 3,200 individuals in one of our programs. That's just Crossroads. Statewide, there's somewhere around 4,000 or so, perhaps a little more than that, people who at one point during the year may find themselves homeless. And we know that the solution to homelessness is housing. It's as simple as that, and yet in the economy that we have here in Rhode Island, housing prices are extremely high. The cost of housing, is greater than what incomes can keep up with. And on top of that, vacancy rates in Providence in particular and in Rhode Island are extremely low, and so that's driving the cost of housing up even further. And this is a real problem that we have to deal with and try to address.
What's so interesting too is that we're seeing this not only here, but we're seeing this problem nationwide. It's a continuous thing, and I don't think any community has been left untouched. So it's something that we're all going to have to deal with, and this simple solution of housing is something that we just need to figure out. So we're going to continue to talk about that through the course of this discussion, which I think is something that we all really need to pay attention to, whether people want to address it or not. It's something that needs to be paid attention to.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the cold weather response, because the weather that we suffered in December and early January was brutal, and I think people just walking around outside were troubled, and you can just think about people who don't have a shelter to go to, didn't have a home to go to. It really struck a lot of chords and struck a lot of hearts. Talk to us a little bit about what Crossroads does in these situations when we have severe weather.
Sure. So the fact is, and the good news is that Rhode Island overall has a very low, relatively speaking, unsheltered homeless population. Compared to other states and other communities, we actually do a pretty good job of making sure the majority of folks who find themselves homeless have a shelter to go to. Sometimes, and in the case of the storm, that means that it's really overflow shelter, a mat on the floor at Crossroads or at another agency. So over the course of that, those brutally cold temperatures and then the major snowstorm that we had right at the beginning of the year, we actually, over a period of those few days, served over 300 individuals and families in emergency shelter, in one of the shelters that Crossroads operates. We had 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is Crossroads' mission, and we're always available, not just in these extreme weather conditions, but the fact is, being outdoors, being unsheltered is dangerous, not just when it's 2 degrees or below zero, but like today at 30 degrees. And it can be as dangerous to be homeless in the summertime when the temperatures are really, high. And so it's part of what we do, and the provision of emergency shelter, making sure that no person, family or individual is without shelter, is obviously sort of the crisis response, the immediate response. But then again, ultimately, the goal is to rapidly get folks housed. Our goal is that we don't have any person or family in shelter for more than 30 days, on average of 30 days. And that's very hard to do, again, given the cost of housing and the low availability of rental housing in particular. It's a challenge that we are constantly trying to overcome and be creative about.
So let's talk a little bit about this. Where do we, if we're talking about solutions and we're talking about finding housing for people, where does the housing come from? How do we go about this? How is Crossroads, because you have been successful providing, what was the stat that you gave me, 3,000?
We served over 3,200 people last year in one of our programs.
Okay,
yep.
which is absolutely incredible. But you are committed to providing, the primary mission is to finding permanent residence for your patrons. So let's talk about this. If we're looking to provide solutions, how are you going about doing this? Because you have been successful. Mm-hmm. So how do we continue this, and how can we solve homelessness in our state?
Sure. So it's a combination of things, Molly. Crossroads as an organization owns or manages over 350 units of housing, so individual apartments, permanent supportive housing, and those units are really targeted to the individuals and families who have the most severe needs, the folks who need permanent supportive housing. That's housing that is permanent, it's affordable, and it comes with services to support the household in them. The great majority, however, of the people that we serve are their needs are more moderate, so they're considered in a category of rapid rehousing. And for those folks, we're using market rate housing. So we have resources, different programs, grant programs, particularly rental assistance that we receive through the state that helps subsidize the rent for these households for a limited period of time, giving folks time to get on their feet and to become stabilized. Back to the high cost of housing and the low availability. And so those two, it makes it challenging, but we're always looking for landlords and property owners who would be interested in working with us. It's a real advantage to property owners and landlords who, we can help keep their units filled and, get rid of some of the red tape for them in terms of finding tenants. And the average person doesn't come with a social worker who's going to help support them help them if they run into trouble along the way. So one of the biggest things that we need are more units, more landlords willing to work with us and help them fill their units.
That's an interesting perspective. I'm wondering if you've had pushback from people saying we don't want to offer these services, or we don't want to offer our apartment space or condo space or whatever it is because they're worried about the clientele coming in.
Sure. Yeah, there's always folks who are hesitant or are not willing, but we have a great team of housing locators, housing navigators, and these are people who work in real estate field, and they understand what landlords and property owners are looking for and develop the relationships. And we say to landlords, give us one apartment, let us show you how this program works. And more often than not, I can't think of too many examples of landlords who said no, they weren't willing to go forward. We actually have landlords now who are looking to acquire more property so that they can work with us more. But there's still, we have waiting lists, unfortunately, of families and individuals who are waiting for available housing.
That's, what you said before though, there's people applying that they want to work with you, so that's phenomenal.
Definitely.
Talk to me a little bit about what you see, and we've talked about this a bit, what you see the biggest challenges are for Crossroads and for combating these combating homelessness as we move forward in 2018.
Sure. So it's, funding is always the biggest challenge that we have, Molly. The fact is we get only some of the funds we need to operate through government grants and contracts, and we rely greatly on individual donors, corporations, people who support our work. And Rhode Island's a small state. It's hard to continue to grow those resources. The fact is the government funds and contracts tend to be level funded from year to year or cut, and so prices continue to rise, costs increase. We're trying to keep the professional staff that we have, and all of us need to make our livings, and so it's there's so many factors that are complicating the work. At the end of the day, it's the support and generosity of folks helping to keep us doing the great work that we do.
I think that a lot of attention has been brought to homelessness, and I think that has helped reduce the stigma. That's what I'm hoping. I've read a lot of articles about this. I've read, there was actually a photographer who I was hoping to have on the show soon who's worked to bring a lot of attention to homelessness and tell people's stories. Do you think that we still need to work to fight stigma? Is that still a challenge?
I think it absolutely is, although I agree that, there's definitely been some progress made. I think, the more we can do to educate folks about who really are the people who are experiencing homelessness. The great majority of folks who find themselves homeless, it happens once in their lifetime, it's for a brief period, and they'll never be homeless again. And I run into people all the time who tell me, when they find out what I do or where I work, say, when I was in this circumstance, perhaps in college or a younger person, or my family went through something like this. It can happen to anyone, and while we still do need to work on the stigma that that is associated with it, the fact is it really is a situation that we were looking at the 2017 numbers, and we noticed a trend last year with our families experiencing homelessness. Traditionally, families who've come to us for emergency shelter have been about 70% of them have been single parents, predominantly single moms with children, and then about a 30% two-parent families. Last year, we saw a 10% increase in the number of two-parent families.
Wow.
And that says something to me, again, about, what's happening out in the, in the economy, that we have more and more two-parent families seeking shelter, and very often the families are, the parents are working. And so it's a misconception that you become homeless if you're unemployed or only receiving public benefits. That's just not the case.
I mean, that's striking, the fact that it's gone up 10% just in the past year.
Right.
So, and I'm just thinking as you're talking, what would we do? What would we do without Crossroads, right?
Thank you. Yes, and I wonder that too. Although, I mean, the goal is that we don't, to reach a day where we don't need Crossroads, at least not for the shelter part of what we do.
Yeah.
I think Crossroads will always be around providing that permanent housing, right? The ultimate, final, and long-term solution for homelessness.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll be at a point in time, whether it takes 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or moving out of that emergency response and into that long-term response. Hopefully, I mean, is that kind of the goal? Do you have like a long-term mission statement?
And that actually is, it is already happening, Molly. So since Crossroads a number of years ago really shifted our philosophy and our service delivery from a shelter and crisis response to a housing response, and we've been able to see results of that. Again, if we're limiting the flow at the front door, reducing the number of people who find themselves experiencing homelessness, and then on the back door, making sure that we get folks housed. But it's an availability of housing, so that, making sure that we have enough units of enough homes and apartments for folks to go to is really critical. We, one of the programs we operate is the Harrington Hall Shelter in Cranston, Rhode Island, which is a state-funded shelter for men. The Harrington Hall Shelter has 112 beds in it, and for many, many years was always at or beyond capacity. Last year, we focused our efforts on trying to house the long-term chronic homeless, the men who had been staying there for years and years and years. And there was a point last year where we had 5 men who had been basically living at Harrington Hall. These 5 men had a combined total homelessness of 47 years.
Wow.
And we housed those 5 men. And when you take those 5 people and house them, that's 5 beds that had been occupied every single night for years. Suddenly there's a lot more capacity in the system to take care of the folks who find themselves, for a brief period of time experiencing homelessness. So it's something that we're really proud of, and it proves that the model and the service delivery and the philosophy of Housing First really works.
Michelle, I think we'll end on that note, because that is a very good, it gave me goosebumps talking about that, and I bet those men, what a feeling of pride and joy that they could then find themselves at home.
Absolutely. It's where everyone should have a home.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle. I hope you'll come back and chat with us some more.
I'd love that. Thank you, Molly.
I would love that too. So thank you for joining us here on GoLocal Live. Please hang tight, everyone, as we get set up for our next guest. Everyone, thanks for joining us here on GoLocal Live in the Navigate and Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Molly O'Brien. Andrea James Gomez joins me. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. I'm so glad to chat with you today. So she is Program and Youth Director of the Rhode Island for Community and Justice. So we're excited to have a chat with you today.
Excited to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about this new year. So it's a new year. You have a new location.
We do.
And a new partnership. So talk to us a little bit about what the new year is bringing for your program.
Absolutely. So it's a new year, but it is an old organization. We've actually been around since 1952. Rhode Island for Community and Justice is a nonprofit that focuses on eliminating bias, bigotry, and racism, promoting respect and understanding among all races, religions, and cultures through conflict resolution, advocacy, and most importantly, education. So this new year really brings us a focus on that education, those new partnerships. We've moved into a collaborative space in St. John's Episcopalian Church. So we're there, we're being joined by the Center for Reconciliation, so they're also moving in. So we're the two new partners that are joining the Church Beyond Walls, as well as the diocese that's there. And it's so exciting because we all have such social justice missions that we're really looking forward to different ways that we can partner and help Rhode Island move forward as we think about social justice.
Which I think is so great and so exciting, and so congratulations on moving into the new space. Talk to me a little bit about the work that you do. You're working primarily with youth because you are the youth program director. Talk to me a little bit about some of the programs that you offer. Like you said, you're primary working in social justice. Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit about some of the programs that you offer.
Sure. So the programs are very personal to me because I actually participated in one of the youth programs as a high school student. So I know from firsthand experience just how powerful they can be. For our youth programs, it's really centered around our signature camp, Project Respect. It's a week-long leadership development program for high school students in the summer that really focuses on understanding systems of oppression, allowing them the space to reflect on their own personal experiences of oppression as well as privilege in order to set them up for the year, because we have a youth action council that runs year-round that really encourages the youth who have participated in the camp to continue their growth and work on dismantling systems of oppression. I had the opportunity of participating in the camp the summer after my freshman year, and then I got to be the co-chair of the Youth Action Council for a few years after. So RSUJ has been home to me for a very long time, and it's really taught me just the importance of having a space where youth can really be reflective and critical of their lived experiences and then be able to do something with that.
I'm super interested. I've been excited to chat with, whether it was you or with Toby, about this for the past week or so, because I think the work that you do within this community is so valuable, and so I wanted to talk more about the programs and more about just what's happened. The past year has been very turbulent in so many regards. There have been so many more people stepping up and taking action in whatever platform they choose to do that. So, but I was really curious to talk to you because you are involved with youth, and so I'm curious to see what youth have been saying, what youth have been feeling, because here's a forum where they can go out, they can have conversations, and they can really express themselves. So I'm kind of curious what that's been like for you and what young people have been saying.
Sure. So I have an interesting perspective because I started the job in this new year, literally 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm very much new to this particular set of youth, but what I have noticed in the work that I was doing previously is that the systems of oppression aren't all that different. The experiences that youth and adults are experiencing now have been experienced for decades. I think the biggest difference is the culture around talking about it. It's just more on top for a lot more people. And so that means that now youth are ready to have these conversations in places where maybe before they weren't ready to have them. So it's coming up in schools, it's coming up in their extracurriculars, it's coming up everywhere at their families' dinner tables and the such. And I think it's just because it's so much more on top, it's that much more urgent that we have a space where they can come and critically reflect and be real and be honest, and sometimes those are really hard, uncomfortable conversations, but if we don't have the space for those conversations, things just get worse. And we know that, we've seen that. So we're really, really highlighting the importance of creating that space for a shared dialogue.
And so do you think, I mean, is that kind of your mission as we move forward in 2018, is to create those opportunities, to create that safe space to have these conversations and to do so in a productive and positive manner?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do that with our youth, but we do that through our other programs as well. I think one of the things I'm most excited about for this particular year, coming on with RICJ, we're also focusing on creating spaces for adults. Right, so we know that these conversations come up in workplaces, especially if you work at a corporation, at a nonprofit, government, whatever it is. You know, adults also need some structure, need some help in getting real, being uncomfortable, and we're very excited to be able to offer those opportunities to organizations that are looking to have those facilitated conversations. And the really cool aspect about it is, since we do work with youth so much, many of those conversations can also be facilitated in part by youth, which again is dismantling another system of oppression, which is ageism. So making sure we're taking our youth seriously because they know their lived experiences. Thanks to our program, they are trained facilitators and they do their work well.
You know, that's a unique way to look at it, because I did want to talk a little bit about the programs that you offer, kind of cultural training, sensitivity training, diversity training that you offer for businesses, that you offer for schools. But that's a unique way to look at it, where you bring in younger people, youth, you bring in who are trained specifically for this. And it's an interesting way to approach it, to look at it, where you're offering this safe space, and it is somewhat cultural training, sensitivity training. What have you found response to be with these programs?
Sure, I think for the most part, people are hungry to have these conversations. Yeah. It's their lived experiences. We're seeing it every day in our lives, and we don't always have that space to talk about it. You don't necessarily come into work and intentionally get into those conversations with your colleagues, but
it's
it
coming
impacts,
up, yeah.
It impacts your ability to do your job. Yeah. It impacts your own mental health as you're dealing with your daily lives. So I do think that because of that hunger, folks are more eager. They're more willing to make themselves uncomfortable. Nobody really searches for that discomfort. However, I think now, because of the culture, because of the things that were mentioned earlier, I think that folks understand that we are not going to grow if we don't get uncomfortable, and folks want to grow. We want to be doing better for our country, and so folks are just way more willing to do the hard work required.
Do you think that in Rhode Island and in Providence, that this is just something that has to happen because we are such a culturally diverse community?
Absolutely. As a Latina who was not born in this country, I absolutely do think that it's important for Rhode Island to really look itself in the mirror and think about how our growing diversity is going to impact all aspects of our shared lives together in our community, and making sure that we're creating a space for everyone at the table.
Let's talk a little bit about the programs. You said there are programs that work specifically with at-risk youth. What success have you seen with those programs, and what has feedback been like?
Sure. So I will only briefly mention these programs because, as I mentioned, I've only been here 2 weeks.
That's fine.
And that's not one of the programs that I work on.
But you also have come, like you mentioned, you've been part of this group for a very long time, so you can touch base on them.
Sure. So we do work with the juvenile hearing boards, and this is really our way of making sure that we're looking at certain systems and ensuring fair access. So we know that certain youth, depending on where they live, often the color of their skin, get into the criminal justice system a lot quicker. So focusing on restorative practices really allows us to see the student as a whole person, while still focusing on whatever action happened, right? Making sure they're making amends for what happened.
Interesting.
So I know we have the juvenile hearing boards in Providence and Central Falls. My husband's actually one of the members on the hearing board in Central Falls, so I hear from him the impact and the power of really being able to have youth own their actions and still be seen as a whole person and allowed to redeem themselves through real work.
That's interesting, and I think that's so important because you can get a disconnect if you're not owning up to your actions. And
absolutely.
It's hard to be a young person. So being able to be held accountable and owning up to that, and apparently your husband said it's working, right? So that's good. Let's talk a little bit about something else that I found super interesting. One of the programs and services that you provide is the Rhode Island Civil Rights Roundtable. And it's a venue for the community activists to really just come together and work together. How do you think that this forum can be beneficial for Rhode Island and really also as we move forward in 2018?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, we recognize that we're not the only organization that's doing social justice work, especially around issues of race, and that there are a lot of other organizations that are doing the hard work as well. And with those overlapping missions, we know that we can be so much more effective if we're being strategic and working together. So I think that's really the biggest thing, making sure that we're all pushing back on each other and holding each other accountable, and that we're keeping our eyes on, similar strategies, similar things that'll move us forward.
So let's talk a little bit about this. Obviously you've been part of this organization growing up, but you said you just came into this position not too long ago. So again, congratulations to you. What do you want to do? What impact do you want to make?
Yes, so because I participated in the camp, social justice has been such an important part of my life for a very long time. When I was younger, it was easy for me to focus on being a woman, being Latina. I was undocumented, I identify as queer, like all these oppressed identities. But as I grew up, I realized that in order to do this work, the biggest thing I can do is really focus on my privilege. I am able-bodied, I am cisgender, and while I focus on my privilege, it's a lot easier for me to hold other people accountable to their privilege. And I think that's what's exciting to me, that we have a venue that is, people are willingly coming to us, asking us to hold them accountable and to help them check their privilege, because it's work we all have to do. I've been doing this since high school, and I still have to check my privilege and do the work. And I think that's the most exciting thing, especially with the new partnerships, the fact that there's so many different organizations that are excited about doing this work. Rhode Island is such a tiny state. We have the potential to make huge impact, specifically in this way. I think we can really be a leader in how we approach these things.
I think checking privilege is very important. I find myself holding myself accountable often, especially as we move forward in 2018. That might be a good New Year's resolution,
yes,
right? For
absolutely.
some people, right?
Absolutely. I think one of the ways that I look at our work is just the fact that we can help hold up a mirror for folks. And we have to start by holding up a mirror to ourselves and really doing that critical work, that kind of personal reflection and analysis. But then we're there to help out and hold up the mirror for other folks. Because it's hard work. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know where your areas that you need some more growth. And that's what we're here for, to help provide that helping hand, that support, because it is hard work. And sometimes we all need that little help.
And I think what's neat too is that the organization, it's not about tearing people down or saying oh, you need to check yourself. It's about building up and building a better community. So, and I think that sometimes that can get lost, especially whether it's through media or social media. Sometimes those messages can get lost, and it's really about building each other up, which is interesting too, because the organization tries to hold the media accountable and provide checks for the media, which I think is definitely beneficial. If people are interested in maybe entering one of the programs or entering one of the trainings, can people do so as individuals, or does it have to be part of a group or
Absolutely. No, there are multiple ways to get engaged with our organization and the work we do. In fact, the best way to find out more is to come to our open house this coming Monday, January 22nd from 5 to 7 at 271 North Main Street in Providence. And there you'll be able to see not just our organization and the work we're doing, but the other organizations that are also present that are overlapping in mission. So you can see where we fit amongst that. But there you'll learn a lot about the youth work. We'll have youth facilitators there, so you can try out a little bit of the programming that they do. We'll have folks from the juvenile hearing boards there, so you can ask them questions about what that process is like. And you can find other opportunities for you to get engaged, right? Maybe you are dying to have your organization have these conversations. Come talk to us, come visit with us. Again, Monday, January 22nd from 5 to 7 p.m., 271 North Main Street in Providence. There is parking and it's free, so you should come.
Which is very exciting. I think kind of the key message here is really what you said before. It's having these conversations. Absolutely. And whether it's uncomfortable or not. And I've had these conversations too on this show, and off the show, quite frankly, is we need to have these conversations. Yes. And that's what makes us better as people, as individuals, and better as a society. Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining me, Andrea. It's been such a pleasure. I hope that you will come back and chat some more with us. So thank you so much, and looking forward to the open house. So everyone, please hang tight as we get set up here for our next guest on GoLocal Live. There you go. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on GoLocal Live with the Navigate and Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Molly O'Brien. Vanessa Voles, the Executive Director of Sojourner House, joins us here today. Vanessa, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on your show again.
Oh, well, we're very happy to have you once again. So I want to say thank you and congratulations because Sojourner House recently won a national award for your work within the community, one of only 4 organizations to do so.
That is correct, yes.
So congratulations. So I might as well say the award.
Sure.
I think I have it in here somewhere. It's the 2017 Mary Byron Celebrating Solutions Award, and it's given to organizations that are providing local innovations working to break the cycle of violence. So let's talk a little bit about, just to remind and refresh people, a little bit about what Sojourner House does and some of the programs that you offer.
Absolutely. So we are a comprehensive domestic and sexual violence agency. So we're mostly a direct services organization, which means we work directly with victims who are in crisis and trying to rebuild their lives. And we provide supportive services such as counseling and advocacy. Our biggest program is a housing program, so we provide everything from emergency shelter if someone's in an emergency situation. We have a transitional housing program, which is a longer-term housing program, and we now also do permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, so we kind of have everything on the continuum for people that need housing. And then I always like to say that ideally we want to put ourselves out of business.
Yes, definitely.
So we also do prevention work, so we're really interested in trying to prevent violence before it happens, and so we do a lot of work in the schools, specifically with middle, high school, college students, teaching them about warning signs about abusive relationships, about dating violence, about how to support your peers if you know someone else is in an abusive situation. So ideally we would like to prevent abuse before it happens.
Which I think the education aspect is so crucial, especially when it comes to younger children and youth especially. Let's talk a little bit about this award, and the reason why you were given an award is because you were, the key word I think is solutions.
Right.
And I think that's fascinating. You mentioned, eventually you'd like to put yourself out of business, which I think all these service organizations kind of have that same mission. You want to put yourself out of business. So hopefully we can get to that, however long it takes. So one of the reasons why you were given this award was for the outstanding work that you're doing to provide services and support for the LGBTQ community, which I think is excellent. I believe I have the quote from the letter here. So Sojourner House's LGBTQ advocacy and education program effort to break the cycle of intimate partner violence served as a model for the nation, and the award is a small gift of thanks for their exemplary work. So I think that's outstanding. Talk to us a little bit about the services that you provide specifically for this community.
So we have housing options available to the LGBT community. So oftentimes when people think of a domestic violence agency, they think of a shelter for women and children. Yeah. And we do have a shelter for women and children, but we also have shelter space available for male identified victims and for trans individuals. And so I talk a lot about continuum of services. And so we really strive to make sure that any victim, regardless of their sexual or gender orientation, can come to our agency and receive services. And so we can provide housing to victims who identify as part of the LGBT community. We have an LGBTQ manager, so we have a full-time staff member who does outreach in the community. Again, oftentimes domestic violence agencies are seen as a resource for heterosexual women. And so we like to make sure that other organizations, that the community, that potential clients know that we can serve all types of victims. So we do outreach in the community. We also do a lot of trainings in the community. So we can come and actually provide LGBT cultural competency to other organizations. And so we've actually in the past year, and I think this is part of the reason why we won the award, we've been working with the Providence Police Department, training police officers on LGBT cultural competency. How do you respond to a situation? Police are often trained on how to respond to domestic violence situations, and it's usually a man and a woman, and they receive training on that. And what do they do if they show up and it's 2 men in a situation or 2 women in the situation, and how can you be sensitive to that incident and provide services and support? So we've been doing a lot of training with law enforcement officials about those issues.
And moving forward in 2018, you're continuing those, correct?
Absolutely, yes. So our housing program is actually growing. We are bringing more beds on because there's greater need for our services. And then the educational work with law enforcement, with schools, with community groups. Sometimes we have community groups reach out and say, you know, I'd really like to educate our staff, provide them with an overview of how to work with the LGBT community. Sometimes organizations will reach out to us and say they want to update brochures or materials, and how can they make it more inclusive to the LGBT community. Just little things like putting a rainbow flag on your door, or, you know, making your using inclusive language in your materials. So we're always happy to help organizations with that kind of work.
I think that's so impressive that people are now nationwide looking to you as an organization. So not only statewide, people coming to you, but now this national recognition. So that, I mean, that speaks volumes. Do you think that something being where we are, being more inclusive, that might have something to do with it? Do you think that you can provide an example for areas that maybe aren't quite so inclusive?
So are you talking about the fact that we live in Rhode Island?
Maybe a more progressive community.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I do have colleagues who work in other parts of the country. Yeah. I have a good friend, colleague who does work in Texas, for example. She said there's no way that she could run a program like we're running here in Providence.
Which is, I mean, it breaks my heart to think that, yeah, there are programs that are available, but for people in the LGBTQ community that are going through domestic violence situations that have nowhere to turn.
Absolutely. I think that is a reality. I think that Rhode Island, for the most part, is a pretty progressive place. I've been at Sojourner House for 7 years, and very, very rarely has anyone ever questioned the work that we do with the LGBT community. I would say, if anything, people are more interested in supporting our organization because they appreciate the fact that we are a resource for every victim. And I'm very serious when I say that really is our mission. We really want to be able to provide services and resources to anyone, regardless of their gender or sexual orientation, however they identify. So that's really our goal.
Do you think outreach is becoming more part, that outreach and education? You know, we were just talking about social justice and having those conversations about race and how we can elevate our society overall just within Rhode Island. Do you think having these educational programs is becoming, like, people are desiring it more? Do you think that's becoming, will be not necessarily a bigger part of your mission, but you're going to devote more resources to that because people are more interested in it in 2018?
I think there's a lot more visibility about these issues, and I think the different issues, the ones you just named, racism, sexism, sexual orientation, I think homophobia, you know, I think all of those issues overlap. There's a term called intersectionality where we talk about different social issues that intersect and influence each other, and that's certainly something we've been talking about within the domestic violence movement. You know, again, going back to this idea that we're not just here to serve heterosexual women and children. Obviously, we are here to serve them if they need resources, but just thinking outside that circle and realizing there are undocumented victims, there are individuals who identify as LGBTQ, there are individuals who are refugees. You know, there are lots of different groups that may not have always seen domestic violence agencies traditionally as a resource. And so I do think we're living in a time where there's more visibility about these different issues and how they intersect with each other, which I think is really exciting. I think that really can provoke some interesting discussions as a community and as a culture about how we respond to things.
I think that's very true and exciting. I think that's a good word to use. Let's talk a little bit about the domestic violence aspect of this, because it is a problem within our community. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, members of the LGBT community do experience higher rates of domestic violence and sexual violence than heterosexual individuals. Obviously, your organization is providing solutions, but how do you think that we can work to make this violence, I don't know if I can say go away, but to make this less of a problem? Is it education? Is it outreach like your organization is providing? We recently, just I think, 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, we already saw a murder in Massachusetts of a trans woman. I mean, how do we work to reduce this problem?
Right. So, I mean, I think you hit on a couple of key points. I really think we're going to reduce and eliminate violence with a culture shift. And a culture shift is going to come about through education and a shift in our cultural attitudes. And a shift in cultural attitudes is us as a society reflecting on what we value. And do we value all members of our society? And I think there have been times in our history where we haven't valued everyone's value everyone's contributions. And so I think the work that Sojourner House does, and we work with so many allied organizations that are doing amazing work in the community. And I really think it's important that we work together because we can't work in isolation. And I think the more that we raise visibility, the more that victims don't feel that they're alone. A lot of times, especially within the LGBT community, it's shifting a little bit, but there's been so much stigma, there's been so much discrimination against the LGBT community that alone was difficult enough to then say that you're being abused by your partner on top of that. It's a double layer that oftentimes made it really difficult for people to even want to seek services. So it was something they often felt like they just had to live with. So the more that we can shift those cultural attitudes, the more that we can tell our society it's not okay to treat your partner that way, and that there are resources available, there are solutions.
Which is wonderful that we're fortunate enough to have you within our community. So we are looking ahead in 2018. So congratulations once again on this award. What are you looking forward to for this year?
So we are, of course, our hotline rings every day, and we're trying to meet the demand for our services. So we're always thinking about capacity building. How can we provide more services to the community? How can we provide more education to the community? My staff has grown quite a bit. We just brought on 3 new staff members, so some of our programs are growing. One of our new programs is actually a school-based advocacy program, so again, trying to get back to working with youth and trying to get to the root of the problem. Stopping violence before it happens is really becoming more of our focus too. So 2018, I think, is going to be, I hate to say a good year for us because I don't even know what that means in the domestic violence world. I hate to say, oh yes, we're going to have thousands of people come to us for services. I'm glad we're going to be able to provide services to individuals. Certainly it disturbs us that there is such a high number of people who need our services, but the good thing is we are here as a resource if people need us.
But I think that's so, it's always that weird balance of how do we qualify, quantify, but if more people know that you're out there, more people are using you, utilizing these resources, because it is one of those things that underreported too, right? It's just one of those things.
Well, and when you mention that there are higher rates of intimate partner violence in the LGBT community, yes, we know that's true, but we also know that it's underreported in all communities.
It's underreported.
So, and then sometimes that's disturbing too, to think about what the rates are and the fact that that's underreported.
We don't even have the right numbers.
We don't even have the right numbers. This is something that affects everyone, whether it's personally or someone you know. I always say everyone knows someone who has been affected by intimate partner violence.
So I'm really looking forward to the fact that you are extending that outreach into school communities and young communities, because I think there's a lot of great work that can be done with that. So that's exciting as we move forward into the new year. Any fundraisers or things that we can talk about in that area?
So sure, and actually looping back to the award, 2 trustees from the foundation, from the Mary Byron Project, are coming to our spring breakfast. We do a spring breakfast. This year it's May 18th at the Marriott downtown on Orm Street, and they're actually going to be doing a little presentation just explaining why we were selected as one of the award winners last year. So that's coming up in May. And then we also, at our spring breakfast, we give a number of community awards to our supporters and our partners. So we'll be announcing those later in the spring.
That's excellent. Well, thank you so much again for having this conversation with us today. And if you are interested in any of the services that Sojourner House provides, we will, of course, put their phone number and their website on our website as well, so you can connect with them. So, Vanessa, thanks so much for joining us. We're wrapping things up here on GoLocal Live, the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Kate Nagel kicks things off here in just a few moments, so hang tight for more news and politics. I'm Molly O'Brien. Have a great